Okay, so tonight the subject is Sephardic Passover traditions. And actually, before I jump into the discussion of specific Sephardic Passover traditions, I think it's worth mentioning what the origin of the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic Jews are. Um, Technically, the word Sepharad, from which we get Sephardic, means Spain, and Ashkenaz means Germany.
Oh,
But
okay.
broadly speaking, um, the the Sephardic Jews are again technically Jews that were in Spain, and as you probably know, Spain expelled its Jews in 1492, and the Jews went to a wide degree of countries. Actually, a lot went to Portugal right next door, and they were expelled 5 years later. And they went to Morocco, where my wife's family settled, and and Greece and Turkey and Algeria and throughout the world. Um, so the true definition of Sephardic are Jews that actually were in Spain, but there's a broader definition called Mizrahi, and the word Mizrach means east, Jews of the east. Um, and so a lot of times, and actually, I don't know if we'll get to this tonight, but I have a bunch of videos from different Sephardic traditions and actually Yemenite traditions and other um, non-Ashkenazi traditions for Passover. And many of them are, like from Yemen, the Yemenite Jews and so on, and they may not technically be Sephardic, but there's a lot of commonality in that whole world. And on the other side, you have Ashkenazi Jews, which again, technically you might say would be Jews that were in Germany, but you also, Poland and other places in Eastern Europe and European Jews, broadly speaking, became the Ashkenazi Jews. My understanding of this is that, before the destruction of the first temple, Jews were basically in Israel. I mean, you can call them Israelites, but they were basically in Israel. So now you have in 586 BCE, the first destruction of the temple, and the Jewish leadership is carried off to Babylon. About 50 years, well, Persia fairly quickly conquers Babylon, and then the Persians allow the Jewish leadership to return to Eretz Yisrael. But in fact, many Jews were very happy living in Babylon for 50 years, and they stayed. And the interesting thing is, of course, in Babylon, the Jews were actually pretty well treated and were left alone, whereas what we'll see later on is in the Holy Land, they become harassed by the Greeks, the Romans, and the Christians. So, so Babylon actually becomes a major center, or what was Babylon, it is Persia, becomes a major center for Judaism for about 1,000 years or more. And so, and the authoritative Talmud, as I think you may know, is the Babylonian Talmud. And of course, then those lands get conquered eventually, much later, like year 600, 700, by Muslim forces and Arab forces and Muslim forces. Meanwhile, the Jews do return to the Holy Land, and so you have Jews living in the Holy Land, and they come under the dominion of the Greeks. That's where we get the Hanukkah revolt, of the Romans and Christians. And so my kind of shorthanded understanding of the major differences between Ashkenazim and Sephardim are the Sephardim, or the Mizrahim, are Jews of Muslim lands, and the Ashkenazim are Jews of Christian lands. And so they develop different customs. We develop customs based on the land that we live in, and that's true of Jews and other religious traditions as well. Alan.
So I get the Muslim world of Northern Africa, East and Iraq and all that, but the Ashkenazi, to my understanding, which leads to a question I have, is that the Jews of the Mediterranean area migrated to Central and Eastern Europe, leading to the Polish and the German place. And so I have always thought that Ashkenazi and Sephardic was, you can tell them by cultural behaviors based on where the peoples ended up over the centuries. That it's we're the same people, but we have some different traditions based on geography. Is that fair to say that?
Yeah, yes, and again, my sense is that the Jews that were traveling with the Roman trade routes uh, wound up in Europe, whereas the Jews that were living under Muslim lands wound up in different countries.
So
And
that leads to my question, which I can't understand. In my genealogy DNA that I get from 23andMe, I don't remember which one, it doesn't matter, Ancestry, they take a swab of my, and then they tell me where I came from.
right,
And they make the following statement, and my cousins have this also, or the people I've talked to. I am 93% Ashkenazi Jew from Eastern origins of Eastern Europe.
mhm.
Okay, the Eastern Europe is easy, but how can DNA reflect Ashkenazi? It is
Well,
geologic,
okay.
genealogic.
So the answer is
Yeah.
um, when they take you when I mean my here's my speculation. I'm not a genealogist or a scientist in that world, but they keep track of who's Ashkenazi by saying, yes, I'm an Ashkenazi, as they're beginning their research. And then they see, are there any DNA markers which seem to only show up in Ashkenazim and don't show up in other um, peoples? And
This
it
is
actually
like the study where they determined who's a Kohen, right?
exactly.
That kind of.
And
Okay.
the it makes
Now,
sense that you would see that because the Ashkenazim tended to intermarry and stay apart from other folks. So you would, I mean, I think I'm 98% Ashkenazi. I think I'm more Ashkenazi than gefilte fish, technically. But so it makes sense to me. What is interesting is I'm unaware of any similar marker for Sephardic Jews. So, for example, both I and Sonia took the 23andMe test, and as I said, I came back as 98% Ashkenazi. Sonia had markers from all over, Iberia and a little bit of Italy and so on, but there was no mention of Sephardic Jew. I think she had like 1 or 2% Ashkenazi. I think it's because she hangs out with me that she had.
So I assume the non-100% was Sephardic, that some of the family is rooted. I have data from my family research to indicate there was some Turkish and
Oh, that's interesting.
people, but that would be conjecture because the 23andMe does not use the word Sephardic, to your
No,
point.
and to
Yeah,
my
right.
knowledge, I've actually had people tell me that this is not true, and I don't know what the truth is. But to my knowledge, there is no similar marker for Sephardic Jews, whereas there's clearly an Ashkenazi marker.
With the prejudice of the 23andMe analysis.
No, I don't think it's that.
It's okay. It's okay.
But yeah, that other, 2% or 7% may be a Sephardic Jew, or it may be a non-Jew that got married, in there somewhere, or just fooled around.
Good point. Good point.
Stephen and then Bryce.
okay. Now I want to put my hand up but first on the DNA, since we're on that subject. It's not analogous to doing the Cohenim. In terms of Cohenim, they look strictly at Y chromosome DNA because that, like regular Cohen, follows the male line. Whereas on the 23andMe test or any of the ones for what ethnicity are you, it's usually autosomal, sometimes mitochondrial, but by far the least but usually not Y chromosome that they look at. The question I wanted to ask on a different subject is, I know somebody whose family was in the Tsar's Empire up until well after mine and probably yours left, and moved to Persia or Iran. And the question, he feels, since they were living in Iran more recently than in Russia, although they should be they're Persian Jews. Whereas my feeling is they've stayed in Russia after most of the Ashkenazi in America left. They weren't in Persia for very long because they maybe 50 years or something, because it was well into the 20th century when they left Russia, and they came to the US right after the Iranian Revolution. So the question is, should they be considered Persian and therefore Sephardic, or should they be considered Russian and therefore Ashkenazi?
I don't know, nor do I strongly care. I mean, one issue is DNA. So a very dramatic issue regard to DNA, as you know, according to Judaism since the Talmud, you are Jewish if your mother is Jewish. So if you have a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father, you are considered 100% Jewish, but your DNA would presumably only be 50% Jewish. On the other hand,
regular DNA, your autosomal DNA would, your mitochondrial DNA would be all Jewish.
I'm not getting into that. If you have a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, you would also have 50% Jewish DNA, but you would be considered by Judaism to be 0% Jewish. And oh, by the way, if you convert to Judaism, you are considered under Jewish law to be 100% Jewish, and even though you might have 0 Jewish DNA. So the question, hold on a second. So okay. let me finish the thought. The issue of whether you're a Jew or not is an issue of Jewish law. It is not DNA. And I can't tell you how many arguments I've had with people who insist that, you know, their DNA is Jewish or their DNA is not Jewish. And it's really, you know, irrelevant. Am I a Polish Jew? Am I a Russian Jew? Am I an Ashkenazi Jew? I mean, I don't think there's any significance to what I call myself. Sorry, you were going to say something else.
If both parents are Jewish, but one is Ashkenazi and the other is Sephardic, is the child considered Ashkenazi or Sephardic?
There's no reason to make that distinction.
Well, one that's coming up in tonight's lecture is Passover. Do they follow, which set of Passover rules do they follow?
So that's a really interesting question. And it's one of the reasons the conservative movement decided officially to go with the Sephardic definition of what you can eat because of such mixed marriages. But I guess you would decide what cultural tradition you're going to raise your children in. It'd be an interesting question to ask, an Orthodox rabbi. And in fact, it'd be a great question to ask Rabbi Ladowitz in Ventura, because I know he is Ashkenazi and I know his wife is from Casablanca. So next time I see him, I will ask him how you made that distinction. But the answer is I really don't know, but it's a very good question.
Rabbi,
hold on a second, Bryce.
Yeah. So the Jews were expelled from Spain, correct?
Yes.
And some of them went and
although some stayed and converted to Catholicism, and some actually truly converted, and some secretly practiced Judaism.
Yes, conversos, yes.
Right.
But my question is, or what you said, that they were allowed to return. About how long later was it?
No. I was talking about Babylon in 586 BCE.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Only 1,000 years earlier.
I see. Okay. Well, I missed that.
Now, Spain actually about 500 years later. So in 1992, on the 500th anniversary of the expulsion, Spain actually made a fair outreach to Sephardic Jews and offered them Spanish citizenship if they wanted it. And it's actually very helpful for many people to have Spanish citizenship, because that makes you a member of the European Union and free college and all kinds of things. So it's
less helpful now that the UK has left the EU.
Well, that's a separate issue. For if you're living in Morocco and you have a Moroccan passport, it's not very helpful for traveling around the world. Sonia's family actually got Spanish passports because of their help to the King of Spain. This is another whole separate issue. But yeah, Spain has made an outreach to Sephardic Jews, if you can prove that your family was Sephardic, which is another interesting issue, and expelled from Spain, then they were granting automatic Spanish citizenship.
Rabbi,
Erwin and then Lois.
you mentioned German Ashkenazi,
Mhm.
and Ashkenazi is 100% Hungarian name. There was a Hungarian Jew who became a Baron Ashkenazi, and that was during the Austro-Hungarian times.
Yeah, and my business partner, his grandmother on his mother's side was named
Yeah.
Ashkenazi.
Yeah, but
So-
the name is definitely a Hungarian name.
Esterhazy.
Yeah.
Well, the word
Esterhazy,
Ashkenaz,
exactly, not
Ashkenaz
Ashkenazi,
means-
Esterhazy.
Yeah, Esterhazy, but
Okay,
here in the United States they changed it Ashkenazi to
okay. So
but
that's the issue.
Esterhazy.
That's the problem with names, is they get changed all over the map.
Yeah.
The word Ashkenaz in Hebrew means German. Lois.
Okay.
I
Or maybe
appreciate your comment about Jewish law not being the same as DNA, not being the same as culture. What I think is interesting, and it isn't as obvious here in the United States or North America, because we're, I think, something like 80% Ashkenazi, the Jews here.
Probably more in the US.
But when you're in Israel, and Alan, you can tell me if you have the same phenomenon, is that the Sephardic Jews, who I think of as Mizrahi or Sephardic, they look different than we do.
Oh, yeah.
Than European Jews. And they look more like, I can very often not tell the difference between them and Palestinians.
Yes.
And so what that tells me is how much intermarriage outside of the Jewish world there must have been in both the Ashkenazi world and even maybe more in the Sephardic world. What's your experience of that?
Oh, I think the observations that you're giving, Lois, I share that, and because my Israeli cousins who are Ashkenazi, whose parents came from Ukraine, so that he certainly is Ashkenazi, but he can make, Israelis are good at observing whether people are Palestinian or not. They can clearly do that. I'm not sure why. And they also can usually do the Ashkenazi versus Sephardic. The unclear thing is this: what is the difference between Mizrahi? I thought those were native Israelis. Maybe I don't want to guess at this. The definition between Sephardic and Mizrahi, what is that again?
So Sephardic technically means Jews of Spain. Mizrahi means Jews of Eastern lands. And
meaning the Muslim countries.
Muslim lands, yes.
Okay, got it.
And many of them live in Israel. I mean, Israel is about half Mizrahi, about half Ashkenazi.
Exactly. So the stereotype that sometimes surfaces in North America is that Israel is a source of Ashkenazi Europeans, which is not numerically accurate. I mean, there are plenty from Eastern Europe, Ashkenazi, but the percentage, to my knowledge, is less than 50%, and that the Sephardic or Mizrahi are more than 50%.
Yes, and the Zionist leaders that founded Israel were almost all Ashkenazi.
Right.
So the Ashkenazi were clearly the upper class. Broadly speaking, the Sephardim were the lower class. And Sonia, one of the reasons she didn't stay in Israel is Moroccans were very low class. They were actually even lower class than other Mizrahi Jews, because when the state of Israel was founded in 1948, you had a huge influx of Jews from Arab lands, many of whom were expelled from Arab lands after the War of Independence. In Morocco's always been more favorably disposed toward Jews than other Arab lands. And in Morocco, the Jews didn't start leaving en masse until about 1955 or 1956. So they were sort of seen as late comers to the state of Israel. And, there's a kind of a funny story that Sonia tells about how much lower class Moroccans were. And she was going to the University of Tel Aviv. She actually made Aliyah and was in school to learn Hebrew and study. And one of her classmates, a guy, brought her home to his Ashkenazi parents because he wanted to show them that that's Moroccan Jews go to college. And so she gets invited and they're having dinner, and her parents are saying to her, you're really from Morocco? And she says, yes. And she says, and your parents, where are they from? Morocco. And your grandparents? Morocco. And your great-grandparents? Morocco. And he says, going way, 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 way back, where are they from? He says, so she says, oh, well, in 1492, we were in Spain. So they say, oh, you're European. You're not Moroccan. So there was a great deal of prejudice for non-Ashkenazi Jews that's changing with the times and with the ascent of some, Sephardic parties, political parties. And also you have the arrival of the Ethiopian Jews who are neither Ashkenazi nor Sephardic, but clearly, a very, very different culture and easy to spot. Because of melatonin, not melatonin.
Yeah.
No,
Melanin.
melanin. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, Stephen, you had your virtual hand up so long it's actually
I
turning yellow.
Still up from earlier.
Oh, okay. So, Bryce.
Yeah, so I'm just looking up origin of Ashkenaz and Ashkenazi, and as you said, it's a medieval Hebrew name for Germany. And
Yes.
European Jews came to be called Ashkenaz because the main centers for Jewish learning were located in Germany.
Yes. If you go back, I would say 500 years or so, and then Poland became actually the major center for Ashkenazi Jews. And I think the number is something like, I don't know, it's 2/3 of all American Jews have some Polish ancestry, or some very large fraction. I may be off on the number. Alan.
So two things. So when you were talking about Sonia's ancestry, I was reminded of my first trip to Israel in 1986. And it's a business meeting, and we're in a lunchroom, and the 10 people are going around asking where their families were from. And this guy who I became friends with says he was from Egypt. And I said, oh, I've never met somebody from Egypt. Are there a lot of Jews in Egypt? And the other guy down the hall says, we're all from Egypt.
Right. Yeah,
that would be the other answer. But
if you take the Bible literally, that is true.
The other answer is Sephardic versus, there is a great quasi-drama called The Beauty Queen of Jerusalem.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And it's set during the Mandate period in the early 20s, when the British have their, control of the area. But you can learn from the family that the Ottoman Empire residents in that period were almost all Sephardic, and they were disgusted with the Ashkenazi. The negative statements that are made about the Ashkenazi show the prejudice that existed among I'm going to call them the locals, because this family was a long-term, not Ashkenazi, and the drama and the little bit of history that's in it is worth watching.
Yeah, it's a very good series. And of course, the Sabras, the native Israelis, if you go back far enough, are all Sephardic or Mizrahi, because Israel was a Muslim land, under the Ottoman Empire and so on. I wanted to point out the discussion of how similar looking Palestinians or native Arabs and Mizrahi Jews are. I remember vividly being in Israel and seeing Israeli, I don't know if they were police or soldiers, just harassing a group of young men. And boy, I couldn't tell the difference between they were clearly not Jewish, and the Jews that I know. And when I traveled around Israel with Sonia, everyone recognized Sonia as being from Morocco. The Moroccans she would run into would, not because she knew them, but they would recognize her as being from Morocco. And she was wearing a name tag in Hebrew that I bought her. She didn't have a Hebrew name, so we decided we were going to call her Shana, which is a Yiddish name for beautiful. And the Moroccan Jews that she met were aghast that she had a Yiddish name, jewelry on. So it's a very interesting world. Okay, so with that introduction, we're going to start delving into this article. And I know next week, I think I'm going to pick up, I have to decide, I actually have a wonderful selection of slides about Passover observance around the world from Hebrew Union College. And maybe we'll get into that in more detail. There's a lot of music and so on. It's really kind of fun. Okay, so let me go to share screen and sound.
Why is the word for Ashkenazi a Hebrew word and not a Yiddish word?
I'm not 100% certain that it is a Hebrew word and not a Yiddish word. Why is it Hebrew? The different languages. I don't know why.
I was just wondering why a word for a group of people who spoke Yiddish would be, why they would choose to identify themselves using a Hebrew word when they mostly just used Hebrew for prayer and used Yiddish for pretty much everything else.
But yeah,
they might not have named themselves. Somebody else might have named them.
I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm asking. Maybe that is what happened. That would be the answer to my question if that's what happened.
I don't know the answer to that question, but the same issue applies to Sephardic Jews. Sepharad, I'm pretty certain that's a Hebrew word. Is definitely not a Spanish word. A Spanish word would be España. But the Jews living there, by and large, spoke Arabic, and in Sonia's generation they spoke French, and Sonia's grandparents' generation they spoke Spanish, and nobody's speaking Hebrew, for the last 2,000 years, until modern Hebrew develops in Israel. Okay, so I presume you can see the article. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is Sephardic Passover traditions. Rabbi Barbara Aiello, I actually have no idea who she is, but she had a good article. And let me see if I can. This is a slightly different. Oh, zoom. Okay, I can make it a little bigger. Okay, so would someone like to begin? I'll read the first paragraph. Sephardic traditions at the Passover Seder. First, the question of what's the difference. So yeah, would someone like to pick up? There is a division. Okay, so I hear no volunteers. Bryce, would you like to read?
Sure. There is a division within the Jewish community that began thousands of years ago and continues to this day. It is not a division between religious denominations such as Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, or Reconstructionist. The division is earlier and more pervasive. It is the division between Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews. The division seems odd, especially since Ashkenaz is the Hebrew word for German. In practice, most Jews whose families come from Eastern Europe, from countries such as Germany, Poland, and Russia, are considered Ashkenazim. Those whose families come from either Spain or the Arab world are called the Sephardim. But if you meet a Jew and she tells you her last name is Ashkenazi, then she is almost certainly Sephardic.
Let me move up a little bit. Yeah, welcome to the world of Judaism. Go ahead. Yeah, please explain. Bryce?
That's because many generations ago, one of her European ancestors went to live among the Sephardi Jews. That ancestor was referred to as the Ashkenazi, and the name stuck, even though the family took on the culture and the customs of the Sephardi Jews.
So that's almost hints a little bit at the question that you asked, Stephen, and that is, if you're a Sephardic Jew, but you go, and if you're an Ashkenazi Jew and you go and you live among the Sephardim, that you're probably going to wind up practicing Sephardic rituals after a generation or two. And it may not be a really hard question of Jewish law, but Next time I see Rabbi Lodowitz, I will ask him that question. Bryce, if you're okay with reading, please continue.
Sure. Sephardi Jews. The word Sephardi comes from the word Sepharad, which is the Hebrew word for Spain. Those of us whose background is Sephardic trace our roots to the Jews of Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Morocco, and other parts of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Within the group known as Sephardic are Jews whose history is that of the Anusim.
Yeah,
Anusim, I'm sorry?
I would say Anosim, but
Anosim? Okay, Anosim. Is that of the Anosim. Anosim is the Hebrew word for the forced ones, and Sephardic Jews who are also Anosim are Jews whose roots include having been forced into Christian practice, called Moranos, or those who took their Jewish practices into hiding, crypto-Jews. Interestingly, the word Moranos is not a Spanish word, but a Portuguese one, and a word which is no longer appropriate among many Sephardim. It comes from the Ladino, the language of the Sephardi that is a mix of Spanish and Hebrew, and although it means swine, oh my gosh, in Spanish, the word Moranos in Portuguese often means coerced one and comes from the Hebrew word anus, which has the same meaning. Seder traditions for us are a collection of practices that are Sephardic in origin. But for many of us, these practices have grown and changed because they were practiced underground in either Marano or crypto-Jewish households.
actually, gosh, when
Labels are for the jelly jars, not the Jews.
let me point out. Yeah, I remember Sonia explaining this story to somebody just recently, like maybe even on this last trip to Mexico. She said one time she was a school psychologist in South Central Los Angeles, where you have many, Latino Jews and Latino people and Black people. And she was, talking to a girl, I think, 12 or so, and she was just basically getting to know the girl and just asking her, kind of, what's your favorite this and that. And she said, what's your favorite food? And the girl said the secret flatbread. And Sonia said, what are you talking about? And she said, in our house, I think they associated it with Easter, that we would make the bread. First, we would close all the curtains in the house so no one could see in. And you would roll the bread out and make the bread on the floor so no one could see what you were doing because it was secret bread. And this little girl in South Central Los Angeles had no clue that there was anything associated with Judaism in connection with the secret bread, but that was her favorite food, probably because of kind of the mystical ritual of making this. So anyway, go ahead. Somebody was
Wasn't
okay.
me.
It's ironic.
Okay.
The one person you find who actually likes matzah.
Yeah.
No,
There are people that like matzah.
yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
I do for 3 days. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I wrote a parody of "Let It Go," and the last line, which I think was very funny, but at least the group I sang it to, I think didn't. You know the song from Frozen, "Let It Go." So
Yeah.
something, let us go, can't something anymore. Let us go. We've a promised land to restore. We leave today. God leads the way. Something, I'm not going to worry about Pharaoh's army. And my great last line, which I'm very proud of, is matzah never bothered me anyway. But you have to know that song. And, if you have grandchildren and you watch Frozen 14 times over, anyway, let's continue. Labels are for the jelly jars. Bryce.
It is important to build a bridge of understanding between Jews of all backgrounds. When my family came to America, there was a young girl from our Sephardic community who fell in love with a young man from an Ashkenazi shul. This happened in the 1950s, and the uproar between the two families was similar to their reactions to a mixed marriage. Today, There are still great differences between Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews, both in belief and practice. But as we work to broaden Jewish continuity and identity, it is more helpful to focus on those things that unite us rather than those that divide us. Labels are for the jelly jars, not the Jews. Our sages tell us that from a halachic perspective, any custom accepted by a community over a significant period of time carries great weight. If our rabbis are correct, then many of our interesting, even quirky Seder traditions are not wrong, but examples of Jewish differences that enhance us all.
Okay, so now we're going to just get a list of these.
Rice is considered kosher for Pesach by Sephardi Jews. It was a tradition among Egyptian Jews to purchase all the Pesach rice 1 month before the holiday. For some families, that meant that they would buy about 40 pounds of rice. The rice would be placed in the middle of the table, and the family would sift and wash the rice, then divide it into 8 portions for the 8 days of Pesach. Rice is part of a group of legumes known in Hebrew as kitniyot. These foods, sorry?
Well pronounced.
Thank you. These foods are considered kosher for Passover by Sephardi Jews and include corn, millet, string beans, green beans, lentils, split peas, soybeans, and chickpeas.
So let me just point out, so it should be pretty clear, but Ashkenazi Jews don't consider rice chametz, but consider it kitniot, and therefore not permissible for Passover. And beans are also kitniot, and so the Maxwell House Company got into the Haggadah business because the purchase of coffee fell off dramatically amongst Ashkenazi Jews in the United States during Passover, because they reasoned that coffee is made from coffee beans are beans are kitniot, so coffee is not kosher for Passover. But technically, coffee beans are not beans at all, they are fruit, and I can't comment any more biologically on that. So the Maxwell House Company set out to make a big point that coffee is kosher for Passover, and that's how they got into the Haggadah business, and they are by far the largest publisher of Haggadot in Judaism. Alan.
Oh, me? Oh, Ellen, sorry.
Yes, yeah. Yes, you, Alan Warshaw.
You
Oh,
got
I'm
your
sorry.
hand raised.
I do, but I thought she said Ellen. So the beans part reminds me of another factor that causes, I think by practice, is that the containers of chametz were barrels, and part of the conclusion was that we Ashkenazi shouldn't eat certain foods, not because the Torah doesn't say it, but because we might be eating food that was taken from containers that were inappropriate. Is that, and the coffee reminded me of whether the coffee beans falls into that category.
Well, the answer is it doesn't fall into the category, because the issue is it a legume? Is it a bean? The origin of why the Ashkenazim forbade kitniot, I've heard, is that the grains that are kitniot can look like kosher grains like wheat and so on, and it's difficult to separate it and to make sure that you're not inadvertently eating chametz. And the problem is, and don't ask me why this is true, and as a Reformed Jew, I don't worry about it, but you may have heard the issue of 1/60th. It's called shishim. So if you have, let's say you're making a vat of, beef stew, and a drop of milk falls into the beef stew, or a fly, actually more likely, a fly drops into the beef stew, right? And it's mixed up and it's been boiling and so on. Now the question is, has the drop of milk or the fly rendered the entire beef stew unkosher? And the answer is no, because the rule is that if the impurity is less than 1/60th by volume, then it's still okay. It's called the rule of Shishim. And the reason the reason it's 1/60th is the Babylonian number system was based on 60. And,
That's
that's one of the reasons that, well, that's the reason my understanding is we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes
Yes,
in an hour.
that's correct.
Now, that
So
rule
why
does
did-
not, that rule
And that's
doesn't
why we
apply.
have
Let me finish the
360
thought. Sorry?
That's why we have 360 degrees in a circle.
Okay, good. That rule doesn't apply to kosher for Passover. The rule is on kosher for Passover is that any amount of chametz makes the whole meal chametzdik, makes it not kosher for Passover. So the rules are much more stringent, which is why you go through the house searching. You can't even own chametz. I mean, you may be familiar with some of these rules. In Morocco, Sonia said that would say that before Passover, actually around Purim, they would start cleaning the house, and they would actually take. Now, they had servants doing this. They would take all the furniture out of the house, put it, outside, and clean the house thoroughly and repaint the house, and even open the mattresses and clean the mattress stuffing or replace the mattress stuffing because crumbs of cookies and so on might fall into it. So the rules on being kosher for Passover are extremely stringent, and I think this is why the kitniot issue developed, because it's one of these examples of making a fence around the Torah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
could you tell me why you sell chametz?
The reason you sell chametz, you may be familiar. Well, the reason is not only aren't you allowed to eat chametz, but you're not allowed to own chametz, because in the Torah it says chametz will not be found in your habitations. So you're not allowed to own it. So as a matter of practice, I just got my note from Chabad. You probably did too, Erwin.
Yeah.
As a matter of practice, what many Jews do is, let's say you have a bunch of canned food and it's not certified kosher for Passover. So what many Jews will do is they will take all the food that is not kosher for Passover, put it in a closet or some, I don't know, cardboard box. I really don't know because I've never done this. And seal it up so it won't be inadvertently taken. But now you still own it. So
Yeah.
so now what they do is you have an agent, usually a rabbi, who on your behalf sells all of your chametz that you might deliberately or inadvertently own, sells all the chametz of the community to a non-Jew for $1. And the payment is due 9 days later. So once the sale is made, even though that chametz is sitting in your home, it belongs to the non-Jew and you're okay. 9 days later, the non-Jew doesn't make the payment. Therefore, the sale is canceled and you get to own your chametz again. So you either like that or you hate that. It reminds me.
I have one more question, which
let me tell my joke
to-
first. Hold on.
Okay.
I heard a joke once that said that if the rabbis ruled that smoking was non-kosher, the Orthodox Jews would observe it. Conservative Jews would smoke, but only outside their homes. And the Reform Jews would sell. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The Reform Jews would ignore it. The conservative Jews would smoke, but only outside the home. And the Orthodox Jews would sell their lungs to a non-Jew. Yes. Your next question, Erwin.
My next question is that I saw this in several Sephardic temples. Why do they have sand on the floor?
So there are in the Caribbean, this begins, and my understanding was it was to absorb sound.
Oh,
Because of this Sephardim fear.
In Amsterdam.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Amsterdam, even though it's European, many of the Jews, I think most of the Jews from Amsterdam are Sephardic, because many of the Jews from Portugal, when they were expelled from Portugal, went to Amsterdam. So there's a very important Sephardic community in
Yeah.
That's my understanding. Okay, we are probably not going to get through this article, but that never stopped us before.
One more thing too
Yes.
is that for quite a while, Amsterdam was actually owned by Spain. I don't know if you knew that.
No,
It
I didn't know that.
was actually owned by Spain and revolted against Spain. So that's a reason why so many Spanish Jews would have been comfortable in
Yeah, makes sense.
yes.
Okay, the Seder plate in Morocco.
The Seder plate is brought to the Seder table with great ceremony. It would be covered with a beautiful scarf, and the family would sing as the plate arrived at the table. Before it was set down, the Seder plate would be placed on a child's head and then rotated for everyone to see.
And next Wednesday, I'll show a video of this ritual called Bilihu, which I think is really Moroccan. Okay, Tunisia, Sicily, and Sardinia, more Sephardic Jews.
As the plate arrives at the table, the Seder leader sets it on the head of the Seder leader. The plate is then passed from person to person around the table, held for a moment on each head by a family member. The Seder begins in this manner to demonstrate that we were once slaves in Egypt and carried heavy burdens on our heads. The matzah. At the point in the Haggadah where the matzah is described as the bread of affliction, Egyptian and Moroccan Jews would have ready 3 pieces of matzah tied up in a napkin like a little sack. The sack would be passed around the table shoulder to shoulder like this. First, the sack would be held on the person's right shoulder, and the leader would ask him, "Where are you from?" The person with the shoulder sack would reply, "I'm from Egypt." The leader would then ask the same person, "Where are you going?" Then the person with the sack would shift it to the left shoulder and say, "I am going to
Yerushalayim.
Yes, you're right.
Yerushalayim."
Yeah, and in fact, when they say I am from Egypt, they would say Mi Mitzrayim, and then we're going Yerushalayim.
Yerusha. It's not a word I've seen before. Yerushalayim. Will you come with me? The sack is then passed to the next person at that table who says yes, and the process repeats around the table.
This is a good thing because Seders aren't long enough. Alan.
The Sardinia and Sicily that was mentioned here, which are really, my understanding, part of Italy, but they're considered Sephardic areas.
Apparently, the Jews living there were Sephardic.
Okay, they're close to North Africa. They're close enough to North Africa to qualify.
Yeah.
Okay, I just was surprised they wouldn't be connected.
Yeah, because it's not geographic; it's cultural and ancestral.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Pan de Semita.
Or Semitic bread, which looks like a cookie.
Yeah, it does.
Passover bread made and eaten first by the Jews in pre-Inquisition Spain, and later on by Mexicans and Mexican Americans along the Texas border. Note, there are some historians who believe that the entire Caucasian population of Mexico,
I would say so,
is of Jewish origin, having escaped the Inquisition and fled to what is now Mexico. In the remote villages of Mexico, many peasants observe Jewish traditions and customs without knowing the underlying Jewish basis of their practice. Pan de Semita is always eaten around Passover season, even when families don't understand their Jewish connection. It is always unleavened and is made by combining 2 cups of flour, 1/2 cup of water, a few tablespoons of olive oil, and baked unleavened. The Mexicans say that pork lard is prohibited, hence the name Semitic. Only olive oil may be used. And what was that title? The 10 Plagues.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yemenite Jews follow a custom that has become minhag for many of us.
The word minhag means a local custom.
Okay. As each plague is said aloud, the Seder leader would pour a little bit of wine from his cup into a tin can, When all the plagues have been repeated, the matriarch of the family would take the tin can out into the farthest part of the yard, pour the wine into the ground, and say in a loud whisper, "May this go to all our enemies and haters. May they create no suffering for us or for themselves. Amen." Those at the table remain very quiet so that the loud whisper can be heard. In Greece, this same ceremony is done with vinegar poured into a can as each plague is said.
Okay.
Singing Dayenu. In Italy, the Seder table is set with a green onion with long stems, one for each person. When it is time to sing Dayenu, each person takes an onion and wields it like a whip. At the chorus, each person takes the onion and whips the wrist of the person next to him, her. The sound of the onion stems represent the sound of the whips of our slave masters. In Iran, Afghanistan, and Iraq, the onions are gathered in a bunch, and one person whips the person next to him, her, him, then passes the onion bunch along. Incidentally, this ritual is performed while singing Dayenu, because Dayenu is the song of miracles, so the whipping reminds us that it was a miracle that we were freed from the lash of oppression. The charoset. The charoset is one of the most popular and well-remembered Seder foods. It is part of the ritual on the Seder plate, chosen to remind us of our lives as slaves, where we had to mix mortar to make the bricks for Pharaoh's buildings. Sephardi charoset is often made with dates as the staple. In Ashkenazi homes, the staple is apple, because the color of the dates is similar to the color of mortar. Other charoset ingredients include a variety of nuts, apricots, cinnamon, and wine. Charoset for anusim, or oppressed Jews. In Cuba, where Jews have had difficulty practicing their religion, traditional fruits are often not available. Apples and nuts and dried fruit were impossible to find. So Cuban Jews created a recipe called charoset of the oppressed. The mixture is basic and includes only matzah, honey, cinnamon, and wine. Using this charoset at your Seder table will remind your family, especially the children, of the plight of Cuban Jews and all oppressed people around the world.
Okay, 4 cups.
The 4 cups in the Sephardi Seder blessings are said over the first and third cup of wine only. According to Sephardic halacha, rabbis believe that the blessings over the first cup for the Kiddush and the third cup after the grace after meals covers those cups as well. Seder dress. It is traditional for everyone to wear white to the Seder. In Italian and Spanish homes, the leader will always dress in a white kaftan or robe, even if the guests do not. It is also a custom to have a crown present and to select someone as pharaoh. The pharaoh wears the crown, and during the singing of Dayenu and the whipping with the onions, the pharaoh moves from table to table, supervising the whipping.
And this is called mimuna.
Mimuna. Mimuna. Mimouna. Look at that.
Well, they're saying that's how to pronounce it. I can tell you how Sonia pronounces it, and it's mimuna.
Okay. Is the celebration that marks, then how can I trust this whole thing? No.
Right.
Is the celebration that marks the end of Pesach. There are several ways to celebrate the crossing of the Sea of Reeds and our path to freedom. In Sephardic synagogues in Mediterranean countries, the synagogue is opened at 1 minute after midnight, the end of the 8th night. The Torah is taken from the ark and the Song of Songs is read while congregants dance in the aisles. Following the Torah reading, the Mimuna festival begins. Mimuna can also be done on the evening of the 9th day with visiting of neighbors and friends. The Mimuna celebration honors Rabbi Maimon, the father of Moses Maimonides, who was the beloved leader of the Moroccan Jews. Traditional Maimuna.
Mimuna. You're gonna.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with that one.
Well, I feel good because I can't pronounce sepulcher or whatever it is.
It's sepulchre. You got it right the first time.
Oh,
and then
okay.
You went veered off into
Okay, sorry.
Traditional Mimuna foods include pita bread cut into pieces and eaten by dipping a piece into honey. The meaning behind this tradition is that the pita and honey will glue the family together, and slavery and oppression will never again separate us. That's pretty creative. That people will go, okay, I got a piece of honey and I got a piece of bread. What can I do with this? And it's like, it represents the suffering of the world. You know?
Right. So anyway, Mimuna is a very big deal, and it's Moroccan and maybe even North African, namely Algeria, and it's become a very big festival in Israel. I had never heard of it until I met Sonia. And we actually, in our congregation in Camarillo, we had some Mimuna festivals. We had one in our home where we invited people in. And Sonia says that it was a wonderful thing in Casablanca, because the thing that was really wonderful about it is that it was the Muslim families that would make these meals or bring food. And everyone's home was open, and the kids, she left Morocco when she was 15, would go from home to home, and there would be candies and delicacies, and the head of a fish was very prominent as like the head of the new time. I'd have to ask her about specific customs, but it was a time of great celebration, and my understanding is this is being picked up these days now in Israel as a way of celebrating the end of Passover, because Passover is so restrictive that it is worthy of celebration when you can go back and and have pizza again. So it's just about 8:00. So next week I think I'm gonna take you through this. I will send you a link. I'm pretty sure I need to do a little bit of research, but I'm pretty sure I have a link so you can download these slides as a huge PowerPoint. Hopefully they're still posted, or maybe they just posted it during COVID. I don't know, but there's a lot of musical, different musical settings for these various prayers, and it's really fun to watch. So, Alan.
So if you get to Israel, there's a museum which used to be called the Museum of Diaspora, but it's called the Anu, which means something like that in English. But on the top floor, there's this wonderful exhibition, almost the whole floor, on Jewish identity, and it develops in various pieces of it the stories about Sephardic and Sephardism and Ashkenazim, and so I just would. And I went online to see what they cover on their website. Doesn't do justice to actually the museum itself. If you get on the campus of the Tel Aviv University.
Yeah, I was at the museum probably in the 1980s, and it was dark and dreary. I know it's been completely redone.
I've been there a couple times, but about 4 or 5 years ago. But I went this time in February, and it was it highlights this point we're discussing. Is lots of other stuff there. They actually opened the day I was there in a room that was an exhibit of the events of October 7th, which is not what I was specifically bringing up, other than to encourage people to check out that museum.
The other thing I'll point out about the differences between Sephardim and Ashkenazim is the movements of Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionists, and so on are all Ashkenazi. And they are really largely divided by the degree to which you observe Jewish law, and Jewish law is allowed to change and be modified with the times. That happened. My theory on this, and it's truly only my theory, is that the Jews living in the Ashkenazi world were living under Christians, and they were oppressed by the Christians, and so they were huddled into ghettos or neighborhoods, and there was not a tremendous amount of business and interaction between Jews and Christians. And so the Jews became very inwardly focused. And when you get inwardly focused, small differences become big differences. And you have these movements beginning about 200 years ago. In the Sephardi world, there's only, like in Morocco, all the synagogues are what we would describe as Orthodox, and that there's separate seating for men and women. The prayers are pretty much the traditional, although again, there's differences between Ashkenazi and Sephardic prayer books, and there's differences between Moroccan and Greek and Turkish and so on. But the community in general is very relaxed about the degree of observance. The only shul is an Orthodox shul, but some people keep strictly kosher, some people observe the Sabbath, some people don't observe the Sabbath, and they're all pretty well tolerated in the Sephardi world. And one of my theories on this is the Sephardi were Jews in Sephardic lands, Jews in Muslim lands, were much more accepted than Jews in Christian lands. So there was a lot of interaction and business being conducted between Jews and Muslims. So degrees of practice and observance varied widely, and there was never sort of this kind of crackdown and sort of ostracism if you weren't being strictly observant. So in the Sephardic world, there are no Reformed Sephardic synagogues, conservative Sephardic synagogues, Orthodox Sephardic synagogues. They're all sort of considered traditional, and so to me that's a very interesting. In the Ashkenazi Chabad world, women don't allow their hair to show and so on, and they dress very modestly. In the Sephardic world, you won't be dressing immodestly, but a woman might wear a little kerchief on her head, but her hair is clearly showing. And you don't have the same levels of restriction among the way Judaism is actually practiced in Casablanca.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how, but Satmar is a very small town north of Hungary. And I don't know during the communist regime how the Satmar Jews survived, but the Satmar Rebbe was very, very famous and never agreed anything with the Rebbe in New York.
Oh yeah, they're different branches of Hasidism, and they don't get along.
But now I heard from some Hungarians who came out that now thousands of people from all over the world goes to Satmar once a year and celebrate the Satmar Rebbe, and they have very, very strict rules.
Yes, I mean, like most Hasidim, they're ultra Orthodox.
Yes.
They are anti-Zionist. The Satmars object to the existence of Israel. They actually, on Independence Day in Israel, they often burn the Israeli flag. They participate in Iranian anti-Semitic demonstrations calling for the downfall of Israel. I think my impression is they survived by coming to the U.S. Maybe Israel. But it was not easy to practice your Judaism in communist countries.
No. Yeah. But I remember when I went to Israel the first time, and you see signs and things painted on the wall against Israel by the Satmar group.
Yep. Okay, Alan?
If you want, on this subject, Hartman just had a podcast on the history of, not Hartman, HUC, I'm sorry, HUC's Connect podcast. They had a discussion with two people who've just written a book about the evolution of the Satmar in the U.S. and so that would be an hour worth listening to, because I learned things like the city of Monroe, New York, which is an hour from New York, was created by the Satmar because they realized having a community in the city of New York was going to cause assimilation, let's say,
Right.
or other negative experiences. So they wanted to be isolated. And then they go on a little, I mean, obviously there's a book about it. And so HUC Connect, Curious Yoel is what is the
Kiryat Yoel.
yeah,
Curious Yoel would be the Ashkenazi pronunciation.
name for the original person who brought the community to the United States from, I guess I didn't realize it was Hungary, but they did that. And when they brought it to New York, they realized this isn't going to work because they're going to become American, and we want to focus on our practices. So I mentioned that in case Erwin or anybody else wants to see how that's treated. Thank you.
Yep. Very interesting. Okay. Well, thank you all. I'm sorry I didn't do a better job notifying. And I will send that, apologize in the note I'll send out either later today or tomorrow morning. And
can you check my email, because I don't think I receive any notification from
I
you.
check it all the time. Did you get one later from me today?
No.
Check your spam folder.
Spam folder?
Yep. It's not kosher, but it might be there.
Why would it go there?
I don't know. Yeah, Alan may be able to explain it. I can't explain it. There's one of the guys I played.
Have you gotten emails from Rabbi previously?
No.
You never get them?
No.
Okay. Yeah, and he's on the list, and I don't know why.
Okay, so then that's Rabbi's recommendation is
because I associate with Satmar Rebbe. That's the reason.
That may be the reason.
It might be. And also, but anyway, find somebody that you can find who can look over your shoulder at your computer to figure out how your email is set up, because that's sometimes hard to do over the phone. And so that's
occasionally I have found email addresses in mass mailings with my name, where my name and the @ have been separated by a space.
Okay, that's also Michael. Erwin, the other thing is, make sure Rabbi Michael Lotker just has his email set up is in your contact list, because I was missing the the Jewish the JTA. I was getting things put into trash, and then when I added the name of the source to my contacts, like I never sent to them, but then the software sometimes throws away things if they don't know who you are. So things like that come to mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good night, everyone.
Okay. Yep. I'm going to stop recording.